Good morning, and thank you for joining us for today's panel, Shovel Ready Agency Heads on How They're Implementing Ambitious Government Infrastructure Plans. I am Lindsay Wong, the moderator of today's panel. I am a partner at Gowling WLG, the sponsor for today's panel, and this is where I practice infrastructure and P3 projects and have been doing so for the last 10 years. With me today as panelists are Canada's most recognized infrastructure and agency leaders and deputy ministers. We have Cory Grandy. Cory is the Deputy Minister of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure for Newfoundland and Labrador. Cory began his career with the public service in Newfoundland. Deputy Minister of Transportation and Works, Assistant Deputy Minister of the Infrastructure Branch, Director of Municipal Infrastructure and Planning in the Department of Municipal Affairs and Environment, among others. Also with me is Mark Liedemann. Mark is President and CEO of Infrastructure BC. Mark has nearly 20 years of infrastructure experience and has been with Infrastructure BC since 2008 when he had joined from PricewaterhouseCoopers. He has been part of the executive team at Infrastructure BC since 2016 and was appointed to his current role in 2018. Also with us today is Michael Lindsay. Michael is President and CEO of Infrastructure Ontario. Michael's past experience includes President of Project Delivery at Infrastructure Ontario, Special Advisor to the Government of Ontario on the upload of the Toronto subway system, Head of Strategic Partnership and Government for the Investment Management Corporation of Ontario, Global Director of Infrastructure Planning and Advisory at Hatch, and Senior Vice President of Commercial Projects at Infrastructure Ontario. Also with me is Kyle Toffan. Kyle is Deputy Minister of SaskBuilds and Procurement. He has significant past experience working for the Government of Saskatchewan, most notably as the President and CEO of SaskBuilds Corporation from 2018 to 2020, Executive Director of Capital Planning and Infrastructure with SaskBuilds from 2013 to 2015, and Director of Grants Administration with the Ministry of Government Relations from 2007 to 2012. Each of our bios are set out on the conference app, and so I welcome you to take a look there. Before we move on to our topic of discussion, I want to thank Mark in particular for joining us today during this extremely difficult time back home in British Columbia, where they're facing a state of emergency as a result of a significant storm that has brought widespread flooding and mudslides. I think I speak for everyone by saying that we are thinking of British Columbia and its residents at this time. I want to remind our audience that we will save time for questions and answers at the end of the panel, so please feel free to use the conference app to submit any questions you might have for our panelists. So to get started, with billions committed in government budgets to infrastructure projects across Canada, I'll start off by asking our panel, what innovations are each of your agencies introducing to get shovels in the ground quickly? And perhaps, Mark, this might be most relevant for you and the current moment and state of affairs. So why don't we start off with you?
All right. Thanks, Lindsay. So I made a couple of notes in relation to this question last week, and I guess I could go through some of those, but honestly, they've all been superseded. Shovel ready for me last week was something much more orderly and protracted and laid out. To me, shovel ready now, and what I and other people in the BC government need to do is find ways to get the highways priorities reopened as quickly as possible. You know, at the moment, we are an island unto ourselves out here on the West Coast. We are completely disconnected from the rest of Canada except by air, with no rail access and no highway access. So it is going to be a significant issue for us. And many of you would have seen the pictures on TV, and the devastation and destruction is quite severe. This is not going to be a simple fix, and it won't be an inexpensive fix. We're still assessing the scope of the problem, but I think we will have to be very kind of nimble and creative and push ourselves to do things in ways that we've probably never considered before. And we'll probably also need to even consider reprioritizing some of our spend and our kind of overall, say, contractor community resources, as well as our own human resources that we have within the public sector to able to achieve this. So that's kind of my thoughts in the last 2 days. But before that, I had thoughts from last week, and that is we are trying out, I think, as many of the other agencies are, a variety of different delivery models to kind of respond to project needs as well as market interests and needs. You'll see that we're using a much broader variety of contract delivery models than we've done in the past. We're using progressive design build. We're using something called provisional design build, which is similar but not quite the same. It's the price is maybe fixed a little bit later than with progressive DB. We're doing just plain old DB. We do CM for lots of renovation projects. We still like design build finance, particularly for kind of big time sensitive projects. And we're doing our first alliance model, which I'm finding quite interesting. I have quite a role there along with others. And that's been a bit of an eye-opening, pleasantly so, eye-opening experience. I think also to kind of get things ready quicker, we are looking to maybe amend some of the traditional risk allocation on some things, particularly on some of the civil projects. It's probably less of an issue on the vertical projects where contractors generally have more control of the asset as it gets built and it comes out of the ground. But the long linear projects have a different risk profile, and I think we recognize that and need to kind of make some adjustments to make them more palatable to both sides and result in a better outcome. And the other thing, which is kind of counterintuitive to your question, Lindsay, is that I also encourage government to, at times, slow down. We have a lot of projects in BC. I'd say we arguably have a shortage of contractor capacity. We've had a lot of projects with sometimes only one bidder responding, which kind of tells me we are quite busy or stretching the market thin. And you can actually only have well-executed projects if you have well-planned projects. So notwithstanding the emergency state, and we will take appropriate actions that are quick, but for those projects where one has the luxury of time and it's not a state of emergency situation, I continue to preach good planning actually results in good projects and well-executed projects. So don't be overly quick to put projects into procurement. That's very frustrating for the market when procurement documents are half-baked. Then that results in some kind of bid which isn't optimal because we need to make a whole bunch of changes later. So that's just frustrating generally for everybody. So I where I can, I preach, take the time to do good planning. It takes time, but it's worth it. So thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks for that, Mark. And Michael, I'll let you add on to that.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Good morning, everybody. Hope wherever you are, you're happy and healthy and hopeful. And my thanks. Great to see all of my panelists here today. Mark's commentary is pretty much spot on. I would add perhaps a couple of things along some of the same themes that he was unpacking there. So, number one, definitely true to say that we are revisiting risk allocation, particularly in civil projects. I would note that a particular facet of that is also thinking about the packaging of those civil projects and how they come forward to market. So for instance, on subways projects here in the GTHA, dedicated ring-fenced standalone tunneling contracts were ultimately let out with the contracting authority taking back effectively the interface risk of making sure that those tunnels ultimately mesh up with the fully realized project, including rail and stations, etc. And what that construct allowed us to do with our partners at Metrolinx was think about, how we could get forward momentum and real progress on these projects as quick as we possibly could, in parallel to a series of early works that were done to otherwise prepare those corridors. And within those commercial agreements, we also made greater use of incentives, clean incentives around achieving certain milestones around TBM delivery and amount of earth chewed by certain timelines to try to further incentivize, getting into the ground and getting progress faster. Second thing that I would point out, Mark is, for the record, exactly right. I think effective staging is really, really important. And we've always prided ourselves in Ontario in trying to be as transparent as we possibly can be with our market about when projects are coming forward. But equally, I know that each of us is probably having a discussion with our governments proper about the role that government can play actually in mitigating or reducing some of the risk that tends to accrue, particularly to civil projects, but to large and complex projects in every asset class. So the Building Transit Faster Act, passed here in Toronto, the Building Broadband Faster Act, is all about trying to establish a certain amount of planning and timeline certainty when it comes to things like third-party approvals, relocates, et cetera. And I think it's been, particularly on transit so far, tremendous success. Lots of positive feedback from industry about how these projects can be de-risked and therefore progress faster if ultimately there are backstops provided that are regulatory and legislative by government. And then finally, we continue to try to optimize our own procurement processes. We know that a solid diligence and planning upfront is, as Mark says, really, really important. But increasingly, we're making use of standing vendor regimes. We call it the request for qualifications standing offer process. We used it to pre-qualify 8 or 9 counterparties that are able to build, for instance, on a modular basis. And then we've called them up into competitive procurement processes to try to rapidly build long-term care homes at hospital sites, adaptations and expansions to correctional facilities in the north of the province of Ontario. And very soon we're going to do the same thing with schools. So finding ways without ever sacrificing competition and value, to take steps faster at every stage of the process is something that we're trying to do for sure. Lindsay, did we lose you?
Sorry, I lost my audio.
No problem.
So apologies for that. Kyle, I would just want to give you an opportunity to add on anything for Saskatchewan.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And my colleagues did do a pretty good job of outlining some of the innovations that we're looking at as well. And one of the things I would say is that Saskatchewan is a relatively small jurisdiction, and we look to learn from other jurisdictions like Ontario and British Columbia, and have in the past, in fact, and I have thanked them countless times for that knowledge and experience and the ability for us to learn and grow from that. And so one of the things that we've focused on over the past short while to allow us to really refine those innovations is our governance model and understanding some of what Mark said about how we can get things quickly to market when disasters occur, for instance. And so we've spent a lot of time on bringing together one central agency for infrastructure, for instance. And so that's now SaskBuilds and Procurement, which I'm the Deputy Minister of. And we have a board that's structured of governmental MLAs, some ministers, some aren't. And it allows us to get basically our approvals together a lot quicker than in the past. So that's one thing that we focused on in addition to what was already said. The other thing I would talk about is just ensuring that we have the opportunity to streamline and I guess move our capital plan forward a lot quicker. And we put $2 billion of stimulus monies into the capital market right now in Saskatchewan, which has allowed hospitals, schools, long-term care to move a bit quicker. Of course, as Michael pointed out, we do a lot of work on our procurement processes and actually have also consolidated our procurement function across government, and that's also in the SaskBuilds portfolio. So a lot of governance, a lot of different collaborative models through our procurement that we're looking at, a lot of which has been already mentioned. And maybe I'll just leave my comments at that, Lindsay.
Thanks very much, Kyle. And Cory, anything for you to add from Newfoundland and Labrador?
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay, and thanks to the council for the opportunity to be here today, and such a great thing to be able to share the screen with my colleagues here from the other provinces. I think, not to belabor the point, but I think I like to bookend Mark's earlier comments around the importance for good planning. I think your question was around shovel ready, and how do governments move projects quickly. And I think it's very important that the jurisdictions plan and have, sometimes it's necessary to have these plans sitting on a shelf, waiting for the right opportunity for funding agreements that might come from the federal government. And if you're doing that type of high-level planning with, 10 and 15-year outlooks in terms of what your needs are going to be, jurisdictions are better able then to react when funding programs are announced. And in the absence of that good planning, sometimes jurisdictions, governments can be caught flat-footed, and the need to advance a project prior to having any good work done. So I think all jurisdictions, it's important, at the bureaucratic levels to always have that, those longer horizon outlooks, so that we're ready when the opportunity is there. I think in terms of as well shovel ready, we take great pride in some of the projects that we've been able to advance and continue to advance, that were started or planning started prior to the start of the pandemic in early 2020, and our ability to work with our partners to be able to keep those projects moving. And I don't know if it falls in the category of innovation, but I think certainly being open to be able to work with partners in these types of sophisticated contract structures like P3, that willingness to work with your partners to ensure that things keep moving. And we're quite proud of the progress that we've been able to make on that front, in spite of the challenges caused by the pandemic. And I think I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Cory. So building on the last question, where we discussed the innovations used to be shovel ready, we touched a little bit on some of the new models that are being explored in the infrastructure space, such as alliance contracts. I'm curious if we want to do a little bit of a deep dive on those alternative types of delivery, including alliance contracts, integrated project delivery, collaborative contracting, and how your jurisdictions plan to use those models, and where will traditional P3s continue to fit in as we move forward with some of these new types of models that are coming to market. So Kyle, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, for sure, Lindsay. Thanks so much. And I think it's a really good question. And first of all, what I will say is that we have a procurement options analysis process for all major projects that we go through as part of our business case analysis to ensure that a project model fits. And we don't just pick them off the shelf and try to make it fit. We really look at qualitative and quantitative criteria to make sure that whatever model we choose, whether it's more of a P3 approach, traditional, or a collaborative model like integrated project delivery, that it works, or it's going to work. We do have 5 provincial P3s in operations of the DBFM or DBFOM models in the transportation, health, and education categories. And there's a lot of successes that we learned from those models that we like to repeat on any procurement model we choose, whether it be design build or more of a collaborative approach. We are looking at models right now that are new to Saskatchewan, like Progressive Design Build, Alliance, IPD, and we have recently put out to market a couple CM at-risk projects. And this is really to increase market participation and get contractors awarded these projects earlier than maybe a P3 would have allowed in the past for us based on our experience. One other thing I just mentioned before passing it to my colleagues is that we really want to listen to the market as well in regards to risk transfer. And we are hearing quite clearly that we need to make some changes in our models. It doesn't mean that we don't do DBFMs in the future. It just means that we need to be clear about what that risk transfer model will look like going forward. And we want to keep in mind the need to ensure that projects remain on time and on budget. And that's ultimately what we have received for successful outcomes on our P3 projects, those 5 that are currently in operations. And so regardless of the model, we want those really good outcomes to continue to be seen here in Saskatchewan.
Thanks, Kyle. And Michael, why don't you tell us what Infrastructure Ontario is doing?
Thanks, Lindsay. Look, I would start this reply just by noting something important that sometimes goes by the board. And that is that we collectively, not just the people on the screen right now, but everybody who can hear the sound of my voice, have created a world-leading community of infrastructure delivery via P3 models. We have many other jurisdictions that are trying to replicate many of the elements of what we have routinized here in Canada. And that's something that's important to recall. The predictability, the dependability, the transparency associated with what we've collectively created over the last 10 to 15 years has real value. Now, Kyle's absolutely right, and we've all said it in different ways. Even in our traditional P3 models, we're going to think about risk transfer and whether we've got the balance right. And it'll be micro and macro. To take an example, geotechnical risk is something in Ontario we're quite inquisitive about right now. We know that it has been vexing for lots of large, complex projects. So we're thinking about what kind of reliance we can give to counterparties on baseline information when we send it to them. But for us in Ontario, a significant component of our pipeline, which is 38 projects, 60 billion plus, particularly on the social side, are going to continue to be delivered by P3 mechanisms with appropriate evolution and continuous learning about how we keep those contract forms in the crosshairs of our market and make them highly biddable. Beyond that, as Kyle was saying, for us, it's all a function of objective and risk. So there are times when we are given a mission by government to go as fast as we can, where government is looking for technical excellence and innovation in respective design, where we're trying to solve for the best fixed price that we possibly can with the greatest durability for that price over the longevity of a project. And all of that being transparent with government decision makers about what the objectives are on a given project and how they feed into the logic of making a choice vis-a-vis what contract form and delivery model get used is the science that we're trying to create. Kyle is exactly right when he says that this is not just purely about trying to be reflexive or responsive to whatever the trend is of the moment. It very much has to be cited upon how does any given delivery model solve for objectives that government might ultimately have. And then beyond that, I would say, yes, there are places and spaces where we're finding that alliance models, progressive DBFs, progressive DB, or construction management at risk models are proving valuable. And it is true to say, as Mark did, that so we're in the early phase of developing and promulgating those models to our wider industry. But again, to bookend, to use Cory's phrase, I like it. These comments back to where I started. We're hugely, hugely lucky that all of that happens in direct dialogue with a very mature set of counterparties in Canadian industry and beyond, who can give us routine feedback on some of what it is that we're planning. So, Lindsay, I'd end by saying thank you to everybody who has showed up to our market soundings and talked to us about what could or ought to be true about various delivery models, both P3 and otherwise.
Thanks, Michael. And Cory, how about in Newfoundland and Labrador? How do you see your province using these tools?
So Newfoundland and Labrador has, I guess, been one of the later entrants to this particular, space in procurement using public-private partnerships. We're having, great success with it. And we're very fortunate to have built on the success of other places in Canada. And again, I'll echo what Kyle said earlier, to thank Infrastructure Ontario and Mark out in BC and their teams and what was Partnerships BC. We have built on what they have learned in those jurisdictions and having great success with it. And I think that is key to whatever direction the industry goes with different variants on the model. I think the key to that is continuing to build on the successes that people have learned and that we've learned collectively. As Michael said, we're very fortunate in Canada to be, on the leading edge of these procurement mechanisms and learning from each other. And what the strength that we have as a group underneath, an organization like CCPPP is a fantastic opportunity for jurisdictions to continue to build, whether that's in the smaller municipalities, learning and to build on those successes. So I don't think we're going to be quick in Newfoundland and Labrador to take on some of these other models as they evolve right away. I think we'll continue with some of what is now, I guess, a more traditional PPP approach. But we'll be watching keenly what happens on some of these newer models as they evolve, and look forward to how all that plays out. I think it's an exciting time in infrastructure development in Canada right now, and will continue to be.
Thanks, Cory. And Mark, perhaps we'll wrap up with your thoughts on this.
Yeah, we still, a lot of these models don't have private financing them. I think we still value private financing quite highly where we can. We're more short-term private finance focused, but I think, I've talked to my colleagues at IO, and I think they also value private finance quite highly. We've had those kind of discussions. I do think, as Kyle says, you need to kind of look for the right model for the right opportunities from a risk and market acceptance perspective. I think we really do like the competitive alliance. I think that has a future for other potential projects in British Columbia. Another one that kind of fits in this one is kind of integrated project delivery. And it's fairly similar to an alliance model, but the procurement is quite different, how I understand it. I think we're much more attracted to the competitive alliance, where we have more design and price competition between people for kind of I should say, period. IPD has very limited competition before you select your team and you work with them collaboratively to be successful. I don't think I would be comfortable doing that for a particularly large project, maybe a small one, but we do think the competitive alliance is quite good. But I also understand from talking to people in the industry, like on the private side, that I think there's a general lack of understanding what it means. I hear comments from them which indicate that one of the things that I need to do on the public sector side is I need to have more education with the market to actually explain to them what these models are or are not. Because then sometimes we have these market sounding discussions and I hear responses, and the responses tell me, you don't have the same understanding of a competitive alliance that I have. So we're using the same words, but we don't have the same understanding. It makes it hard to have a more meaningful discussion about, is this a good model for a project or not? So I think what we're going to undertake here in BC is some more education with regards to competitive alliance, so that we can have better informed discussions with the market about future opportunities.
Thanks, Mark. So with that, and given the topic of how we're planning on delivering these significant infrastructure pipelines going forward, I want to touch a little bit about what you see as being the greatest challenges and opportunities, either that you've encountered in the past or that you're anticipating as you move forward with these aggressive infrastructure pipelines. So, Cory, why don't you get us started on this one?
Thanks, Lindsay. I think one of our challenges this far east in the country, and being a small jurisdiction, is be able to compete for that interest in the market. I think as there are large infrastructure projects in central Canada and further west, some contractors may see some risk in coming this far east, and so that has been a concern of ours since we started down this path with some of these larger projects, particularly in healthcare. And so keeping that interest and making it look like Newfoundland and Labrador is a good place to invest and a good place to do business will continue to be, I should say, very, very important to us. And I think as things heat up in the rest of Canada, it'll make that more real for us out here, being geographically away from the center and smaller, of course. We face some real fiscal challenges here in this province, and matching infrastructure funding and what is available in infrastructure funding to provincial priorities can also be a challenge. Lots of funding available from the federal government, from Ottawa, and that is very important to us. Sometimes it's a struggle in aligning those priorities, provincial priorities and federal priorities, but we are very grateful to have that type of support from Ottawa. So that is a challenge and an opportunity, I think, at the same time as we work with our colleagues in the federal government.
Thanks, Cory. And Mark, I'm interested to hear your perspective as well.
Like some of the other, like Cory, you know, we also have kind of contractor capacity issues. I think collectively we probably have too many projects in the market, not only on the public side, but, you know, we've got major pipelines getting built here. We've got huge LNG projects for dozens of billions of dollars. So there's a lot of strain kind of on the contractor market. We thought we had supply chain challenges last week, but now we all have greater supply chain challenges, with Canada's biggest port being effectively landlocked. You can't get to the rest of the country, the goods to get out and the goods to get in. So I think that will probably affect all of us, maybe Cory the least, but it's definitely going to affect Michael and Kyle for sure on projects. And then I think the other challenge that I see is owner capacity. We have so many projects that are going in the public sector, and it's somewhat of a challenge, not impossible, but a bit of a challenge to have the experience, resources necessary to manage and be a responsible and informed owner on the public side. So we see that as a challenge. On the opportunity side, you know, government here in BC is got to get the acronym right, but we're looking at something called Environmental, Social, and Governance Framework for Capital. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but what we're really trying to do is, when we have all these major projects, you know, government is quite keen to make sure that, I guess, government policy priorities are being met in conjunction with or through the projects. So that there's kind of 3 or 4 pillars associated with that. One is daycare. You know, we have a shortage of daycare probably here and in most places across the country. So when we're building schools and hospitals, you know, the kind of automatic question is, how can we incorporate a daycare into these facilities? Then we also have mass timber. You know, we're a big forest producing province here. There's big interest in mass timber, and we're looking kind of wherever possible to put mass timber into our projects. And then another pillar of this strategy here is it's called Clean BC. You know, we're definitely working hard to meet our greenhouse gas targets. So it's a big focus on how we can electrify things. So we are actually, I guess, looking to go out to procurement now with a very big hospital, and it's going to be 100% electric. So that's quite interesting. Normally we would always have natural gas boilers and things like that in these ones. We're going to do 100% electric. So it's going to produce no greenhouse gases at all. So we're pushing ourselves in those areas. And then there's also a side on labor. You know, we're looking with a couple of different labor related objectives. Some of those are how can we get more underrepresented people in the construction industry? Collectively in the industry, we actually have a shortage of workers, and that is only forecast to get worse. So we're looking to bring more people into the industry, and people that have traditionally been marginalized, and we want to improve their economic prospects. And that's not only by sometimes giving them jobs, but it's also probably more importantly giving them apprenticeships and allowing them to have a career and change things not only for them, but probably their entire family. So we're working very hard to have kind of more apprenticeship opportunities, and we're actually looking to put specific funding into these projects associated with each of these kind of government policy priorities beyond just the cost of the bricks and mortar and concrete needed to build whatever it is that we're trying to build. But that's kind of a renewed focus, and it is quite exciting to kind of see that and the potential changes that can make to people and society. And that's kind of an evolving area in BC, not without challenges, because we're asking a lot of different things of a lot of different people in the market. But I am quite actually excited by those opportunities that we're pursuing in BC, and we'll see more of that on big projects.
Thanks, Mark. And Kyle, your views.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Mark said was on my notes, and he did a fantastic job of outlining some of those opportunities and challenges that we're facing as well. One of them is, of course, the private sector infrastructure investment here in our province is returning. I wouldn't say that there have been a lot of private sector builds over the past even 5 years, but with BHP Billiton building the biggest potash mine, I think, in our province and maybe even in the world, at 7.5 billion, it makes a big splash in our local market when that is equivalent to our capital budget for a few years. So definitely, investments like that are coming back, and we're quite happy that they are, because those create jobs as well for our economy. Other opportunities, that we're looking at more on the construction side are maybe looking at BIM technology during our design phase, cloud-based project management, and also something that doesn't get talked about much, but improved safety and security programs on the work sites. I think that's something that we want to make sure that when people are working on our jobs, our government infrastructure jobs, that they're safe and they feel secure. Some of the challenges, of course, Mark talked about supply chain issues, labor constraints, so I won't repeat those. But one of the other, maybe it's an opportunity or a challenge, is better alignment with federal government priorities on infrastructure. I think it's something that we have struggled with here in Saskatchewan. They're not completely misaligned, but definitely some of the programs have changed over the past 5 years or so, and we're looking for opportunities to better align and to also have conversations with the federal government on some of the priorities here in our province, including agriculture. And I'll talk about a project on that in the next short while here. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Kyle. And Michael, just want to give you an opportunity to add your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I'm realizing that if there's ever a pregnant pause at the end of your question, I should jump in, because otherwise 3 sterling answers are going to be given. The thing that I would add is this: you invited challenges and opportunities, and I think for all of us, there's one trend that represents both, and that is that in many ways the pandemic, on an operational basis, punted us 5 to 10 years into the future in respect of digitization and thinking about technology suffused infrastructure and the importance of it in our world. And from the Attorney General to hospitals to transit systems, people are thinking right now, about how the characteristics of infrastructure need to change to take account of some of these lessons that we've learned through the pandemic, from signage, wayfinding to HVAC systems. And I think the opportunity is to build better, more resonant and resilient infrastructure moving forward. The challenge is continuing to maintain forward momentum and delivery schedule for our pipelines as we try in flight to think about what has changed about project specifications, or even the nature of what it is we're trying to procure and deliver on behalf of the government, given the desire to incorporate some of those lessons learned. So I bet on us collectively, as well as the talented bureaucrats that we have. But here again, we equally need the voice of industry telling us about some of the innovation that they can bring to the table to help governments, plural, think about achieving what might be a revised operating mode for some of the services that will exist within the assets that we create.
Thanks, Michael. I have one last question for the panel, and I do want to save time for some questions. I think we have a few that have come in. So the last thing I'll ask the panel is just an invitation, really, to discuss any of your current or upcoming projects in your province and detail what you perhaps would like to see the private sector bring to the table. And I also just want to remind you, we have quite a few international delegates today. So if there's anything that the international community can do to get involved and help with some of the challenge we perhaps previously discussed, please touch on that as well. And Michael, I'll give you a chance to speak first.
Thank you. I think it's a continuation of the remarks I was just making, right? So what's happening in Ontario right now? The largest build out of the subway network, of a subway network in the history of Canada. The largest investment in bi-directional frequent commuter rail service ever. The second massive wave of hospital build outs that IO has been privileged enough to deliver with hospital partners. And increasingly role for government in trying to catalyze and in some cases deliver the kinds of long-term care facilities that are going to be so indispensable as part of that continuum of care that we offer to citizens. Not to say nothing of the courthouses, the correctional facilities, and the highways that we're ultimately building. So again, across each of these assets, I think what we're looking for is the perspective of our private sector counterparties as to how we can build them better. Not only better in respect of their characteristics, but how we take new and different approaches to the actual delivery of these assets, using, in some places and spaces, new means and methods of construction in order to get that done. And I would salute again our industry. Through the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, they found a myriad number of ways to continue to make progress on this pretty indispensable public infrastructure that was being built here in Ontario. And I think we want to, leap off of some of that innovation to wider and more programmatic understandings of the art of what's possible. I think if I would point at one thing, it would be the technology related element of this, right? It was the case when IO first started delivering hospitals that building envelope tended to dominate our discussion with industry in respect of those projects. Now, ICAT systems, et cetera, are every bit as important to making sure that you have a highly functioning asset that will meet government's needs. So that would be the one place where we're genuinely trying to create a global community to come together and to advise us as to how we can make sure that our assets are sufficiently modern so that they will have that resonant value for years to come. And as a final note, I would just say, Lindsay, that we're working very hard, at the direction of the Government of Ontario to effectively make participation in our procurements as frictionless as it possibly can be for a wide international set of bidders. And so the feedback of industry on that is welcome too.
Thanks very much, Michael. And Cory, why don't I let you weigh in now?
Sorry, I was doing really well all along with remembering to mute and unmute. Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. And it's great to hear Michael talk about what's happening in Ontario. Again, a smaller jurisdiction here in Newfoundland, so the quantity of projects obviously are smaller. We are in the procurement phase now of our fifth P3 project, DBFM project for a new correctional facility, and so we're very excited to be releasing the RFP to our short list of proponents for that very important project as a new correctional facility here in St. John's. That is I'll say the fifth, and right now, when we came out with our pipeline there a few years ago, this was the fifth P3 project. So in that traditional vertical infrastructure, as we look forward now, I think we need to focus more on municipal infrastructure, water and wastewater. We have the challenge here in this province of a lot of smaller municipalities. So the projects that are required in those communities are smaller, but I think there's opportunity for us to look at those to see what we can do creative to make it fit inside this space. And when I say fit, I don't mean to invent a project for the sake of a project, but to be able to do the projects smarter. And the 20 to 30 year operating life of these types of projects, I think, are very important, and there's still a lot of benefit that we can milk out of this type of procurement model for the benefit of taxpayers. Outside of, I guess, the what we deliver in transportation and infrastructure in the department that I'm in, I think the green economy is going. I don't think we know yet the opportunities that will exist in the green economy, and it'll be very important for all of us. And Newfoundland and Labrador is an energy warehouse, and we will continue to be. And I think there are lots of exciting opportunities. And again, it's outside the wheelhouse of our department, but for our audience, I think there's a lot yet to happen on that side of things. And we are a northern jurisdiction as well, and as we figure out how to address the needs of the north, is also very much on our horizon here in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thanks, Cory. And Mark, next, over to you.
Yeah, like in Ontario, we have a kind of a broad array of projects in different sectors. Thinking about maybe some of the international folks, they tend to be more interested in civil projects. I'd like them to be more interested actually in some of our hospital projects. That would actually be great, because for really large projects, there's limited number of bidders in Canada actually to build the really large hospitals. But on the transport side, we probably have two kind of marquee projects in BC that are far enough into the future that people can actually get themselves organized to look to participate. And the first one I'd highlight would be the George Massey Crossing. It'll be a multi-billion-dollar project. It's going to be an immersed tube tunnel on Canada's largest salmon-bearing river. So that's going to be in an urban area. So that's going to have a lot of challenges. It's been a long time since we probably had an immersed tube tunnel built in Canada, I'd say, and they're not that common globally. So we're definitely going to need global expertise to come in and help us with the immersed tube tunnel technology. But it should be really interesting and exciting project, 8-lane tunnel. And after that's operational, we'll get you to take out the old tunnel just for fun. And then the other one is, we don't have as much transit going on as Toronto does, but locally we have the Surrey Langley SkyTrain project, which is approximately $4 billion, rough and round. And we're still kind of doing the planning, finalizing planning for that, and looking at, as some of the earlier comments, kind of how that packaging is going to get organized. So we're still thinking about that, but that should be a big opportunity. I'm thinking Surrey Langley, it would be great if we could get that out to procurement in the second half of next year. And George Massey Crossing is probably at the beginning of 2023 is when that likely is going to go to market. So I think teams have time to get themselves organized, and can always reach out to us at Infrastructure BC here, and we're happy to provide more details on those projects if people are unfamiliar with them in the market. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, Mark. And Kyle, I'll wrap up with you before we move on to the Q&A session.
Yeah, fantastic. And so we do have quite a strong pipeline here in Saskatchewan, and but I just want to focus on one of our major civil projects in the agri-food space. And so it's related to irrigation. Currently, it's targeted at about $4 billion, quite a major build out of our opportunity to ensure that our land is able to produce food for the world. And so this isn't just our typical type crops like lentils and chickpeas and different grains like wheat and barley. It's really about those other value-added crops too, like squash and the like. So we definitely are looking to do business case analysis right now on this and have a technical team put together as well to do preliminary design and engineering, and hope to have further details on this in the coming months. But definitely this is a project that I believe there to be quite a bit of interest on the international stage, and we definitely welcome conversations on this project that is probably our largest project in history, definitely our largest civil project, and something that we have been working with the federal government on to try to understand how to have them at the table as a funding partner, whether through the infrastructure bank or hopefully through some other granting mechanism as well. So that's the one project I wanted to target. I think there's obviously a pipeline of hospitals and schools and long-term care over $100 million each. But irrigation and agri-food and the build-out related to that is really on our minds right now to develop our economy further.
Thanks, Kyle. So we'll move into some of the audience questions now. So I'll start off, and perhaps I'll direct the first question to Mark. So it's a question about risk allocation, and they're noting that there's been a lot of discussion throughout the conference relating to appropriate risk allocation and communication with the market. So how do you propose projects be presented to the market, and how do you prevent taking back, and apologies, I think the question cut off, how do you prevent taking back, and I'm assuming it's going to relate to the too much of the risk transfer, or what is perhaps the right swing of the pendulum when you're looking at transferring risk between the private sector and the public sector?
Well, that's a wide-ranging question. That could be a topic on a panel on its own, but I think, the first important thing is to actually engage with the market. And, a lot of these, I think the more challenging risk allocation questions are on the civil side, less so on the vertical side. So, we have a good group here in BC, the BC Road Builders Contracting Association. So we often meet with them and have these kind of discussions, and it's good to have kind of an industry type discussion rather than have a discussion with each individual contractor on a one-on-one basis. So we find that kind of a useful group to engage with and have these kind of discussions. But then when we get into specific projects, kind of market sounding is key. We need to provide them details about the project so they can understand, and then we need to have an informed discussion and think about that. Ultimately, we'd like to share the risk. We want to have some incentives, but at the same time, we recognize some of these risks are just too open-ended for contractors, and at some point we need to backstop it, but we don't necessarily need to backstop it from the first dollar. And we need to have incentives that encourage, I'd say, the owner and the contractor to work together to resolve the problems, because many of these problems actually require us to work together and not just say, well, this is not my problem, I can't help you. Normally there's an ability for both sides to help each other. And the trick is to find the right mechanism in a contractual form to do that. So I think I'll leave it at that, Lindsay, but that could go on for a very long time. It was a good question, though.
Great, thanks, Mark. And Michael, I'll direct the next question to you. And it is, Infrastructure Ontario has 2 progressive DBFM hospital projects in the pipeline. What is the expected long-term capital at risk for these projects as a percentage of capital costs? And will it be any different than a traditional DBFM? We
actually have 3. Trillium Health Partners, M-Site, Ottawa Civic, and the Weenie Bico Area Health Authority on the shores of James Bay in Moosonee. The former 2 candidates for progressive DBF models because of their size, and the last one candidate for that same model because of the geographic constraints and remoteness of the location. That is one of the 2 questions which we're actively talking to industry about right now. Look, I would reaffirm that what we are seeking as part of our objectives in Infrastructure Ontario is ensuring that assets are built with a total life cycle view, and that there is the greatest amount of optimization possible as between design, construction, and maintenance of these assets. The basis of the way that we're choosing to procure and develop these projects does put before us the question of what does that therefore mean about the possible involvement of people who will maintain these facilities, when do they enter into that process, or consortium that's coming together in order to deliver as a delivery partner to us, and what ultimately is the long-term capital that ultimately we want to see put at risk associated with a model like that one. But hopefully, Lindsay, by reaffirming that that remains our objective, and we're working on it with our industry right now, I've given people a little bit of comfort. I would just note that, again, we've been lucky to have a couple hundred people showing up, as Mark says, to our progressive market soundings on a program-wide basis, and then very good individual conversations with players as we go about what might be possible. But more to come on that for sure.
Thanks, Michael. And the next question I'll put to the panel generally, just to see if we have a volunteer to tackle it. The question is, why are current projects not mandating more aggressive carbon reduction targets in support of Canada's declared net zero goals?
Well, I'm happy to jump on that, Lindsay. I'm not sure that I agree with the underlying premise. I think we're trying very hard, actually, with ministry partners to take a look at project specifications and to take a view of energy usage within these facilities, opportunities absolutely to reduce their carbon footprint and any manner of ecological benefits that we hope to achieve through the delivery of these projects. So back to your final question to us, here is a place where an international industry can be helpful to us in understanding the kinds of adaptations and innovations which really do give you torque on some of those ecological outcomes. But nobody should walk away from this panel believing that that's not something we're trying to do as aggressively as we can.
We look at that in every single business case. We're kind of do a series of benefit cost analysis for government at different levels of incremental spending to see what kind of greenhouse gas reductions that can be achieved. Like I said, we're doing our first all-electric hospital, which is kind of new for us, for sure. And I'd also say, you know, we are also turning our minds to the carbon footprint of construction, which is very big. And we have a project right now that's out in procurement, kind of a collections and research building. It's around $200 million. It's being done as a DB. While we're not evaluating how much carbon is going to be projected to be used or expelled during the construction process, for the first time, we're actually asking bidders to, as part of their bid submission, use a model which we've provided to them, so we can actually start to understand what the carbon impact of the construction is. And I can see us in the future moving towards a scenario where that actually is part of their evaluated score on how much carbon they produce. We're not there yet, but we're starting as a pilot to actually see what the data looks like on real projects. So I think we are moving in the right direction here.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, Mark, in relation to existing infrastructure, we're definitely looking at the assets that we do have and trying to bring the GHG emissions down on those existing assets. I mean, in my ministry alone, we have $5 billion or more of real estate assets that were built a long time ago in many cases. We're also looking at hospital infrastructure, and one of our large hospital projects coming forward is a mixture of brownfield and greenfield. And I know Ontario's done some of these. I think maybe BC has too. Just in the name of understanding what the cost is to knock down an existing facility and build something brand new, and put that old facility in landfill. And so we've definitely been looking at that as an opportunity for Saskatchewan. Definitely we have more work to do on this net zero side of things and on greenhouse gas emissions, but we have been working quite hard to ensure that we assist with meeting the targets that Canada has set out.
Lindsay, I think the only thing I would add to all those great answers is that what the question tells us is that there's always room for improvement, and there's always it's always right to challenge what governments are doing. Governments are leaders in infrastructure, in the infrastructure space, and as governments require more, I think you know, it encourages that same type of behavior in other sectors as well. So I think we will need to collectively challenge ourselves all the time to do better to meet those important ends.
Thanks all. And I think we are out of time. So first off, thanks to the audience for those questions, and apologies for not being able to get to all of them. I do think there was an underlying message that we've heard from each of our panelists today, and that they are here and willing and really open and welcoming to market feedback and working with the market on improving the delivery of these projects, getting shovels in the ground quickly. So again, I encourage you to reach out and keep that dialogue going so we can continue to make improvements and innovations in the infrastructure space. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. Thanks for taking the time to have this discussion with us. Your views and comments were provided a lot of insight into our plans and are much appreciated. So thank you all very much.